Hi, viewers. In this video, we will dive into the movie Rampage. We will discuss the movie's story, summarize the plot, and explore the cast and characters. Additionally, we will cover the movie's production details and box office performance. Finally, we will share reviews and personal reactions. Let's begin with the movie story. In 1993, a new piece of technology called CRISPR was developed and quickly used to conduct dangerous experiments. In the present day, aboard a space station, a lab rat has been mutated with the CRISPR mutagen and wipes out the entire crew. Dr. Kate Atkins is the sole survivor, and she contacts the head of Energen, the company that developed the CRISPR mutagen, to help her return. Energen CEO Claire Wyden orders her to bring back the mutagen samples, or not return at all. Kate goes back for the samples, but a rat monster chases her. She makes it to the escape pod and releases it as the station explodes with the rat still inside. However, damage to the pod causes it to break open, and Kate is killed as the samples scatter and fly away across the country. At an animal sanctuary in San Diego, primatologist Davis Okoye, played by Dwayne Johnson, leads co-workers Nelson, Connor, and Amy to an ape enclosure. They observe an ape named Pavo attempting to meet with a female ape, but Davis separates them. Pavo becomes upset until Davis gently calms him down. Suddenly, an albino gorilla named George comes running in, causing Connor to panic and further agitate Pavo, who charges at Connor until George knocks him over. George then threatens Pavo until Davis talks him down as well. George turns out to be playful, and Davis considers him his best friend. After work, Amy tries to invite Davis out for drinks, but he politely turns her down. Nelson later approaches him and asks why he feels closer to animals than to people. Davis says animals simply understand him better. That night, the mutagen samples begin to fall, one landing in George's enclosure, another in the forest near a pack of wolves, and the last in a river in Florida. A lone wolf is sprayed with the gas, a crocodile swallows an entire sample, and George is exposed as well. The next morning, Davis is called in to check on George. Nelson tells him George is in the grizzly bear enclosure. They find a dead bear and George hiding in fear. He has a scratch mark on his chest and indicates that the bear attacked him first. George steps out and has grown to 9 feet tall. News reports reveal the mutagen has struck across the country. Agent Russell from the government sees the reports, while Claire Wyden and her brother Brett panic over the financial losses. Still, Claire is satisfied that the mutagen for her Project Rampage experiment is working. To handle what may happen next, Claire suggests hiring a private military group to contain the situation. Kate goes to the animal sanctuary to speak with Davis about what happened. She claims to work for Energen and admits she helped develop the mutagen, believing she may be able to stop George's growth. When they attempt to reach George, he is caged but growing increasingly aggressive. He eventually breaks free and runs loose through the sanctuary, terrifying the guests. Davis chases after him just as the police arrive. Officers aim their guns at George, but Davis manages to calm him down until a helicopter flies overhead and begins firing tranquilizer darts at him. Until he finally passes out. Meanwhile, a military group led by Burke heads into the forest to recover the mutagen sample. They find the container empty. As the team moves deeper into the woods, they discover dead wolves scattered across the ground and a massive footprint embedded in the earth. Suddenly, they are ambushed by the mutated wolf, nicknamed Ralph. He charges through the forest as the team opens fire, but their efforts are futile. Ralph hunts them down one by one until only Burke remains. Desperate, Burke calls for the helicopter to fire on Ralph, but the wolf leaps from the trees, slams into the chopper, and sends it crashing into the lake. Burke is left alone, terrified, and attempts one final stand, but Ralph devours him. Government agent Harvey Russell arrives at the sanctuary to transport George onto a plane to keep him contained from the public. Davis and Kate are taken in for questioning. Davis argues that putting George on a plane is too risky, but Russell insists everything is under control. During the flight, Russell reveals that after reviewing their records, he discovered Kate was fired from Energen after attempting to steal research from the lab, an act that led to 13 months in prison. Davis realizes she lied and that she cannot fix George. After learning about the wolf incident, Claire activates a radio frequency designed to call the mutated animals. Ralph and the giant crocodile, known as Lizzie, begin heading toward Chicago, where Energen is headquartered. Though heavily sedated, George hears the signal and starts to awaken. He flies into a rage, breaks free from his restraints, and attacks the agents as Davis struggles to protect himself and Kate. George nearly kills Russell until Davis intervenes, and George only knocks Russell unconscious. The plane's turbine fails, and it begins to plummet. Davis straps parachutes onto himself, Kate, and Russell, and they jump moments before the aircraft crashes. The three survive the fall and soon realize George has also survived and is heading toward the city. Davis makes it clear he no longer trusts Kate after learning the truth. She explains that while working for Energen, her brother was dying of cancer, and she believed CRISPR might cure him. Instead, she discovered Claire was using it to create dangerous weapons. Kate tried to steal the research to stop her but was caught and imprisoned. Davis then shares how he found George. Poachers had killed George's mother, and a frightened young George was hiding beneath their truck. Davis and his team rescued him and killed the poachers after the men opened fire on them. Russell regains consciousness and, grateful that Davis saved his life, decides to help them. Davis, Kate, and Russell meet with a military team tracking George and Ralph as they approach Chicago. They realize the animals are being drawn into the city and must find a way to stop them. With Russell's help, they steal a helicopter and head into Chicago. George, Ralph, and Lizzie reach the city, unleashing total destruction. Davis and Kate arrive as the monsters begin tearing Chicago apart, knowing there is no easy way to stop what has begun. They realize there is no way they can stop them on their own. They need to reach Energen and find the antidote that might stop the creatures. Davis lands the helicopter, and they race into the building. Amid the chaos, they locate the lab containing the antidote, but the Widens find them first. Brett holds them at gunpoint. Claire reveals the antidote will not return the animals to normal, it will only remove their heightened aggression. She takes the gun and shoots Davis in the abdomen before forcing Kate to go with her. The Widens attempt to board their own helicopter and escape with their research and Kate, but the monsters begin climbing the tower. George reaches the top and smashes the helicopter, sending it crashing and forcing Brett to flee. Davis, having survived the gunshot, reappears and saves Kate. Claire demands their help, but Davis distracts George long enough for Kate to retrieve a vial of the antidote she had hidden in Claire's bag. Kate punches Claire and shoves her toward George's path. George grabs Claire and devours her, along with the antidote. Meanwhile, Brett nearly escapes the building but runs into Russell, who has somehow made it into the city. Russell orders Brett to hand over the laptop containing his research, promising protection. Brett eagerly agrees and runs for the exit, only to be crushed by falling debris. Davis and Kate wait, hoping the antidote will take effect as George continues raging. Ralph and Lizzie reach the top of the tower as well. Davis and Kate board a news helicopter to gain altitude and avoid the destruction. The monsters' battle causes the tower to collapse, crashing to the ground. Davis and Kate survive, and George emerges from the rubble, back to his old self. However, Ralph and Lizzie continue their rampage. Davis and George decide to end it. At the same time, the military prepares to launch a strike to eliminate the monsters, and Russell desperately tries to call it off. George battles Ralph and Lizzie. He throws Ralph aside, but the wolf can glide and fire quills. Lizzie, the largest of them all, is nearly indestructible. Davis lures Ralph into gliding toward him, then moves at the last second, sending Ralph crashing into Lizzie's spines. The crocodile grabs Ralph by the throat and bites his head off, swallowing it whole. George tries to overpower Lizzie, but she is too strong and hurls him into a building, injuring him. Davis wraps a grenade belt around Lizzie's neck and attempts to use the helicopter blades to wound her, but it barely slows her down. Lizzie turns on Davis and nearly devours him until George leaps forward with a metal pole and drives it through her eye, piercing her skull and finally killing her. Witnessing the outcome, the military colonel calls off the strike. George appears gravely wounded and seems to die, only to reveal he was pretending, teasing Davis. The heroes begin to leave the ruined city, wondering where George's new home will be. Dwayne Johnson once again plays a larger-than-life hero in Rampage, a film based on the hit arcade game about gigantic monsters smashing buildings. If you're thinking that sounds like a thin premise for a feature film, you're not entirely wrong. Directed by San Andreas Helmer Brad Payton, this CGI-heavy blockbuster fully embraces its outrageous concept. It is often proudly ridiculous and most comfortable when giant monsters are leveling half of downtown Chicago. Chicago, leaping onto moving helicopters. It's the narrative gaps in between that allow the movie's magic to fade in and out. However, when Dwayne Johnson is doing that action movie star thing he does so well, and when CGI animals are roaring and battling as enormous monsters, there is undeniably goofy fun to be had. You just have to be patient during the build-up. Rampage opens by establishing its ridiculous tone early. A scientist aboard a space station struggles to save genetically engineered samples from a lab experiment gone wrong. The station is ablaze, the crew appears dead, yet she is ordered to secure the samples. Yes, Rampage begins with a super rat on a burning spaceship hurtling toward Earth. It's a bold way to start. The samples plummet to Earth and land in 3 different locations. One crashes into a San Diego wildlife sanctuary managed by Davis Okoye. Davis's favorite animal is a giant albino gorilla named George. The clever creature comes into contact with one of the genetic samples, and before long George is growing at a never-before-seen rate, his size matched by rising aggression and an unstable hunger. He kills a bear, escapes, and soon, well, lots of things go boom. That's why you come to a movie like Rampage, to see and hear things explode. A critical caveat feels necessary here: I love giant monster movies. I still admire the 1933 King Kong, a film I consider one of the most important ever made. I even appreciated Peter Jackson's 2005 remake, as well as more recent interpretations of The King of the Monsters, Gareth Edwards' 2014 American Godzilla and Hideaki Anno's 2016 Japanese Shin Godzilla. There's something uniquely cinematic about the spectacle of films like King Kong and Godzilla. It's not something theater, television, or fiction can replicate in quite the same way. Pair that appreciation for massive creatures smashing buildings with my belief that Dwayne Johnson is one of the few working actors we can genuinely call a movie star, and Rampage should be a slam dunk. I even played the arcade game. So why isn't it? There are moments when Rampage delivers exactly what audiences expect when they buy a ticket. No one can accuse it of failing to provide what the trailers promised, though arguably, one could say the entire movie fits inside those previews. Still, why isn't it the King Kong meets the Rock spectacle it could have been? First, the film takes itself more seriously than its video game origins suggest, striving for emotional undertones. Davis mentions early on that he prefers the company of animals to people, but saying he lacks character would be an understatement. George is actually more developed. Naomie Harris's eventual sidekick, Kate, is given an emotional backstory intended to make her relatable, yet it largely falls flat. A scene in which she and Davis share their pasts, including how Davis rescued George from poachers, aims for depth but never quite lands. It is embarrassingly mishandled. But nothing sinks the film more than Jake Lacy and Malin Ackerman as the villainous siblings running the evil corporation, doing evil science, creating evil giant animals, and plotting even more evil schemes. They sometimes sound as if they were written as broad caricatures. Lacy's Brett even declares, "There's a reason we were doing these experiments in space, yet the performances are so bland that the movie stalls whenever they appear." Far more entertaining are Joe Manganiello's Soldier of Fortune and Jeffrey Dean Morgan's OGA agent. Morgan delivers every line with a tilted head and sly side eye, as if he fully understands how absurd this all is, or at least how absurd it should be. He's clearly having fun, and Johnson remains effortlessly charismatic. Still, director Brad Peyton often struggles to convey that grand monster movie exhilaration. Even when Rampage reaches its explosive set pieces, it can feel like it's merely going through the motions. There are standout moments, a giant wolf colliding with a helicopter midair, George swinging tanks like toys on Michigan Avenue, the creatures scaling skyscrapers, that keep fans engaged. But monster movies should do more than simply engage. They should astonish. They should captivate. They should ignite the imagination so completely that cheesy dialogue and thin characters become not just forgivable, but part of the charm. Rampage never fully reaches the point where you can consistently overlook its flaws, and that's a dangerous weakness for a movie about creatures the size of apartment buildings. It's a delicate balance, and Rampage only occasionally finds it. Perhaps it will be perfected in time. In this loud, gleefully preposterous summer action film, based on the 1980s arcade game of the same name and directed by Brad Peyton, who also helmed San Andreas, Dwayne Johnson returns to familiar territory filled with helicopters and large-scale destruction. While many men of a certain age might show a belt straining at the waist, Johnson's physique remains as imposing as ever, even the back of his shaved head seems to flex when he looks up at the towering chaos above. He does plenty of craning skyward as enormous creatures crash through the skyline. Johnson plays Davis Okoye, a man who feels fear, anger, and a deep emotional kinship with these mega-animals. He senses their pain as the massive beasts rear onto their hind legs, their digitally rendered bodies tearing through urban landscapes, their fur bristling with tranquilizer darts fired by an uncaring military. At its heart, this is the story of one big-hearted man and his even bigger primate companion, George, the gentle, misunderstood albino gorilla who is accidentally exposed to an illegal genetic enhancement and begins growing at an alarming rate, like a monstrous twist on nature itself. Davis, once a Special Forces soldier who hunted poachers, now runs a San Diego wildlife sanctuary. His casually confident musculature is as striking as any CGI creation on screen. He may be built like a brick structure, but he has chosen the quieter life of a zoo caretaker until science and spectacle pull him back into the storm. It is here that he mentors young recruits, including an eager younger woman whose interest in him is politely deflected, another quiet reminder of his family-friendly action hero credentials. But high above Earth, a sinister corporation is developing a genetic editing program designed to alter the size and energy levels of otherwise ordinary animals. Why conduct these experiments in space? Something about zero gravity, or perhaps simply an excuse to show a giant rat rampaging inside a spacecraft. Either way, the reckless project goes wrong. Canisters packed with experimental growth agents burst from the station, blaze through the atmosphere, and crash into the San Diego Reserve, where microscopic particles drift into the nostrils of George, the lovable gorilla, who only a day earlier had been playfully exchanging sign language jokes with Davis. Soon, George begins growing uncontrollably. So do other exposed animals, including a wolf and a massive creature resembling a crocodile crossed with something even more fearsome. The only person who can reach George, and possibly stop the escalating catastrophe, is Davis. In classic creature feature fashion, he is joined by a bona fide scientist who once worked for the same shadowy corporation until she realized how dangerous their research had become. This is Dr. Kate Caldwell, played by Naomie Harris. They also receive gravel-voiced assistance from a government agent named Russell, portrayed by Jeffrey Dean Morgan, a good old Texas boy with a pearl-handled revolver strapped openly at his side. When things turn ugly, Russell quips, "I'm the guy they call to change the sheets." As for the corporation behind it all, it appears to be run by just two people, possibly married, possibly just unsettlingly close siblings, played by Malin Ackerman and Jake Lacey. Their dynamic is so exaggerated they might as well be Amy Poehler and Will Arnett reprising Blades of Glory. It's all wildly over the top, though the CGI itself doesn't quite soar as high as it might have. Perhaps if less of the budget had been spent on that opening space rat sequence, the crashing helicopters might have looked sharper. As for Rampage 2, one imagines at least one of the many screenwriters briefly wondered what would happen if Dwayne Johnson himself inhaled the experimental gas. The thought seems inevitable. Rampage may not be the only mutant alligator movie bold enough to echo the imagery of 9/11 scale destruction, but it certainly embraces its chaos. I had no idea the film was based on a video game until midway through, when a giant flying wolf devours Joe Manganiello and an unmistakable arcade cabinet makes a pointed cameo in the villain's penthouse lair. Since then, I've learned that Rampage, a King Kong-inspired arcade staple from the mid-1980s featuring city-smashing mutant animals, was one of the properties acquired by Warner Brothers when it purchased Midway Games in 2009. Nearly a decade later, the first major adaptation of that deal has arrived, starring The Rock. It's brash and bombastic, though strangely lacking in context. Directed by San Andreas filmmaker Brad Peyton, it often feels like a B-movie concept accidentally routed through a slightly too polished studio pipeline. Manganiello, Naomie Harris, and Malin Ackerman appear briefly, each granted wide theatrical release despite limited material. And for all its repeated name-checking of CRISPR gene editing in an effort to ground its flying wolves in science, Rampage ultimately thrives, or falters, on spectacle alone. I suppose this is, in fact, far more sci-fi than satire. There's a giant alligator. It's aggressively dumb. And I might have felt safe assuming everyone was in on the joke, if there had actually been any good ones. When the evil biotech boss casually asks her brother, "Remember that private military firm we acquired last year?" it's meant to count as wit. It doesn't. I'm not entirely convinced a more openly campy version of this movie would be better, but I am certain this one is bad. Dwayne Johnson plays Davis Okoye, a San Diego primatology expert with a checkered past and a deep mistrust of people, who shares a special bond with an albino gorilla named George. The film's opening act, in which we meet Davis and his wide-eyed sidekicks, who gush about the kale bread they baked while he calmly pacifies the beast, feels so transparently engineered around Johnson's persona that it's almost embarrassing. It's an unpleasant 10 minutes, and for a moment I wondered if I had wandered into a narrative adaptation of a self-help manual. When a flustered blonde colleague, impressed by Davis's dominance over the gorilla, suggests discussing submission techniques over drinks, it doesn't land as a wink at Johnson's cartoonish Superman image so much as a sincere endorsement of it. Fortunately, we don't linger there. An orbiting lab owned by the shadowy Wyden Technologies explodes in space, and canisters of neon green gene-enhancing gas rain back to Earth, where they are promptly inhaled by an alligator, a wolf, and, tragically, George. The animals grow enormous and nearly indestructible. Some gain new abilities, yes, including flight, and all are driven by an unstoppable urge to destroy. Davis teams up with Dr. Kate Caldwell, a disgraced geneticist who proves a far stronger foil for him, largely because Naomie Harris is easily the best performer in the film. Together they search for a possible antidote while the trio of beasts converges on Chicago, leveling it in their fury. Why Rampage? A brief digression: when I was in high school learning about the principles of flight, we used Microsoft Flight Simulator to model lift and drag. For reasons I no longer recall, the simulation defaulted to a map of Chicago, and one classroom exercise involved flying our planes into the Sears Tower to demonstrate structural inaccuracy. This was 1999, 2 years before flying planes into buildings became unthinkable in a very different way. I mention this because the Sears Tower has long occupied a strange, uneasy place in my imagination, making Rampage's climax harder to watch than even its tone-deaf, muscle-flexing opener. Put another way, your self-consciously silly rock-starring popcorn action movie is all fun and games, until it starts echoing 9/11 imagery. Drawn by a radio frequency emitted from the villain's antenna, just go with it. The three mutant animals scale skyscrapers, smashing through floors as they climb, ultimately bringing the building down in a choking cloud of smoke and debris. Plenty of films since 2001 have depicted large-scale destruction in American cities, but few have recreated those images with such unsettling fidelity, and fewer still in service of a giant flying wolf. I had already resigned myself to a certain numb acceptance to get through the film's nonsense about rogue technologies. But at this point, it felt too pointed to enjoy in good conscience. As rubble rains from the sky and distant screams pierce the air, Davis and Kate emerge from the dust cloud, improbably unscathed. There are still about 15 minutes of movie left. I need a drink. Rampage, a shadowy technology company, develops a process that turns innocent animals into giant killer monsters. Unfortunately, their serum infects the wrong creature, including the beloved gorilla of zoologist Davis Okoye, putting the entire world at risk. In Hollywood, if you have a truly dumb idea and a mountain of money to spend on it, you call The Rock. That's not an insult. The man is the industry's greatest salesman, 260 pounds of muscle and charisma. He can convince you to buy into things you were sure you didn't want: a Jumanji reboot, sequels to G.I. Joe, Journey to the Center of the Earth films, buddy comedies with Kevin Hart. All right, everyone has limits. Rampage is a quintessential Johnson project, based on a video game that had virtually no story or characters to begin with, released long before many of his fans were born. It sounds like a terrible foundation for a movie. And it is. But it's also kind of fun. The original Rampage debuted in 1986, back when games were simple: move side to side, punch buildings, shoot at things, gobble power-ups. Repetitive, loud, and glorious. Players controlled one of three giant monsters: a wolf, a lizard, or a gorilla, trying to demolish cities before the military could gun them down and revert them back into the humans they supposedly once were. Curiously, the film discards that central hook. In this version, scientists experimenting with gene editing in an effort to cure cancer accidentally create a serum that transforms ordinary animals into enraged, colossal beasts. To avoid government scrutiny and inconvenient questions about skyscraper-sized rodents, they conduct their research in space. Naturally, everything goes wrong. The space station explodes, and canisters of glowing monster juice hurtle toward Earth. Two crash in the wilderness. One lands in a San Diego wildlife sanctuary, where Davis Okoye works with gorillas. His favorite, an albino named George, is exposed. George grows rapidly and violently. Picking apart the plot is pointless. It barely functions. There's no real arc, no meaningful depth, and honestly, there doesn't need to be. This is a movie about a gorilla punching buildings. Character study would only get in the way. When the villainous siblings, played by Malin Ackerman and Jake Lacey, decide to convert their office tower's radio antenna into a giant monster beacon and casually mention they modified it overnight, who cares how? Likewise, why question how Naomie Harris's scientist manages to hack a multi-billion-dollar corporation using what looks like a thermostat pulled from a fridge? Logic would only slow things down. Those buildings won't punch themselves. That said, when it comes to the building punching, there could have been more of it. This very silly movie could have afforded to be even sillier. Director Brad Peyton, who also made San Andreas, doesn't always keep his tongue fully in his cheek, and at times seems to aim for sincerity instead of spectacle. Johnson mostly plays it cool, raising an eyebrow here and there, but not all of the film shares his breezy confidence. The action sequences could use more visual wit, more delight in the absurdity. And is it greedy to wish the gorilla, wolf, and lizard were even bigger? Warner Brothers may already have Godzilla and King Kong tucked up its sleeve and perhaps didn't want to overshadow those titans. But when it comes to city-crushing beasts, there's always room for more. Rampage is big, dumb fun, but not as big or as dumb as it could have been. Ridiculous, yes. But not quite ridiculous enough. For a movie about animals smashing cities into rubble, it could have gone even further. It feels slightly restrained, just shy of going completely over the top, and that's part of the problem. Dwayne Johnson is one of the biggest stars in Hollywood right now. Normally, at this point in a review, I'd talk about how there has never truly been a great video game adaptation. I'd revisit the usual arguments, point to misfires like Assassin's Creed or Tomb Raider, and outline the familiar challenges of translating gameplay into story. But this time, I don't think I need to. because while Rampage is by no means a masterpiece, it may be the first film to genuinely crack that adaptation puzzle, or at least come closer than most. With that in mind, let's step into a world of giant monsters smashing buildings, because who doesn't love a giant monster smashing buildings? The film opens aboard the Athena-1 space station orbiting Earth. From the very first frame, it's clear something has gone terribly wrong. Inside, the crew is dead, the station torn apart. The lone survivor, Dr. Carrie Atkins, is ordered not to use the escape pod until she secures the experimental samples developed by Claire and Brett Wyden for their company, Energen. Carrie manages to flee the station after being hunted by whatever killed her crew, but her escape pod is damaged during re-entry, sealing her fate. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Davis Okoye, a primatologist and head of the primate center at the San Diego Zoo. He's also a former anti-poaching hunter and a former U.S. Army Special Forces soldier. Davis works closely with gorillas and shares a special bond with George, an albino gorilla he rescued as an infant and taught to communicate using sign language. Some of the samples from the destroyed station survive re-entry. One crashes into George's enclosure, releasing a cloud of green mist that engulfs him. The other canisters land in Wyoming and the Florida Everglades. The next day, Davis realizes something is terribly wrong with his friend. Before going further, a quick warning: the third act makes it difficult to discuss certain elements without spoilers, so consider this your heads up. One of the first things you notice while watching Rampage is the genuine rapport between Davis and George. Part of that comes from Johnson's on-screen presence. He can smolder on cue, but credit also belongs to the writing, the motion capture performance by Jason Liles, and the visual effects team that brings George to life as a true character rather than just a CGI spectacle. Not all of the film's writing is strong, but several genuinely funny moments between Davis and George haven't been spoiled in the trailers. As I mentioned earlier, this may be one of the strongest video game adaptations we've seen, so it's worth looking back at the source material. The original Rampage was an arcade game from the mid-1980s, nearly as old as I am, as younger colleagues often remind me. Players controlled one of three monsters, also featured in the film, and their goal was simple: destroy cities, eat civilians, and avoid being taken down by the military. The biggest change between game and film is that in the original, the monsters were mutated humans. In the movie, they are animals, a far more believable choice. And I think one reason this works better on screen is precisely because the original game had virtually no story, the filmmakers were free to take the core concept, giant mutated monsters destroying cities, and wrap their own narrative around it. And, surprisingly, it kind of works. Rampage is fully comfortable with being brutal. It introduces characters you think will matter, only to have them mercilessly devoured or smashed by a monster. Some of these deaths are genuinely shocking, to the point that I wouldn't recommend bringing young children to see it. The CGI is top-notch, with thoughtful character design. It's a little odd that George just grows bigger like the others but doesn't mutate in other ways, yet the action sequences are well staged, clearly inspired by films like Jurassic World and King Kong. I lean toward calling it homage, though at times it flirts uncomfortably close to imitation. Watching skyscrapers crumble in slow motion remains visually arresting, even if it still feels a little strange after 17 years of CGI spectacle. Not every part of the film hits, though. Some choices feel lazy, like the villain lineup. You've got evil corporate executives, shady private military contractors, and government types looking to profit from chaos. It's as if they ran through a list of universally disliked professions and picked the top 3. And there are odd tonal moments, like when characters have heartfelt conversations amid the wreckage of a crashed plane, standing casually among dead crew and chemical spills as if it were perfectly normal. Small factual nitpicks aside, like a massive Moab realistically needing a C-130 Hercules rather than a B-2 Spirit bomber, the film keeps moving at a breakneck pace. So, do we recommend Rampage? Yes. It's a solid action film with a strong lead, and it delivers exactly what fans of giant monster movies are looking for: a city being smashed to rubble by enormous creatures. It may also be one of the best video game adaptations to date, but only because it stripped everything from the game except the central premise. That may be a hint of where video game adaptations are headed until someone finally figures out how to tell a proper story with them. Rampage is a real head-scratcher. Is it the best movie I've seen in a while, or secretly a work of genius? Maybe both. Based on the 1986 arcade game later ported to home consoles, Rampage stars Dwayne Johnson as Davis Okoye, a primatologist at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary. He finds himself racing to save the world when his best friend, an albino gorilla named George, is exposed to a rapidly spreading gene-editing serum that turns him into a massive, enraged, deadly monster. The movie is a perfectly predictable action spectacle. Almost nothing here hasn't been seen before, but what makes it charming is the little touches, like George communicating through sign language. To that extent, Rampage succeeds. It's dumb, it's fun, and it's a surprisingly faithful tribute to its arcade roots. Rampage works precisely because it doesn't pretend to have a single original thought, and it doesn't try. It's a movie about smashing things, watching them get smashed, and, of course, it stars Dwayne Johnson. If that sounds like the perfect escape after a long day, this is the movie for you. Go ahead, knock yourself out. You'll have fun, and there's even a chance it might leave you with a little to think about afterward. The film puts a twist on the arcade game but not on the action movie formula. In the original Rampage, players chose one of 3 monsters and methodically reduced city after city to rubble. In the movie, the goal is flipped. Our heroes are trying to prevent that very destruction. The plot reads like something anyone might sketch out if tasked with writing a genetic monster action story in 20 minutes, and that's part of the charm. In the prologue, a spacecraft carrying a dangerous experiment explodes. One of the canisters survives re-entry, landing in 3 locations: Wyoming, where a wolf discovers it, the Everglades, where an alligator finds it, and the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary, where George, the albino gorilla, comes into contact with it. The research is illegal, developed by a shady corporate duo, the charming but ruthless Claire and her calculating brother Brett Wyden, who oversee their schemes from a high-rise office, plotting chaos while peering at screens. Meanwhile, Davis Okoye, played by Johnson, is the primatologist who raised George from birth. He discovers that his beloved gorilla friend has been transformed into a monstrous force of destruction. The story follows Davis as he teams up with Dr. Kate Caldwell, a former scientist for the Wyden Corporation, and Hardy Russell, a sardonic government operative. Together, they track George and the other mutated animals as they rampage toward Chicago, while the military closes in. Yes, the movie has it all: greedy corporate villains, a clever scientist, a strong yet sensitive hero, enormous monsters, city-leveling destruction, and a subtle message that it's often humans who behave like the real animals. That's not a strike against it. Movies like this are meant to be explosive, loud, and maybe a little funny. Sure, Rampage has plot holes, but it doesn't care, and you don't need to either. This is a movie based on an arcade game. The goal is to get to the big fight, and it presents the spectacle clearly and coherently. During the long climactic sequence, you always know where you are, which is more than can be said for many Transformers or Marvel blockbusters. There's comfort in watching chaos delivered straightforwardly, no dizzying cuts, just giant monsters, massive destruction, and a hero trying to save the day. Dwayne Johnson headlines Rampage, but the script seems fully aware that the real star of the show is George, and the sheer thrill of watching cities crumble under enormous fists. Rampage stars Dwayne Johnson, one of the few remaining movie stars who can open a film simply by showing up. His last outing, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle, grossed so much it recently became Sony's highest-grossing release ever. In Rampage, the best moments are unquestionably his scenes with George. The gorilla has a brilliant sense of humor, and their chemistry brings the movie's only genuinely touching beats. Yet, the very thing that makes Johnson the film's greatest asset also exposes its biggest flaw. Someone clearly miscalculated when writing Davis Okoye. The script repeatedly emphasizes that Davis supposedly prefers animals over people, defining him as a loner who doesn't like humans. But Johnson simply cannot sell that. He's affable, polite, and always wears a winning smile. We never see him act unfriendly toward humans or animals unless they've genuinely earned it. Sure, his best friend is a gorilla, and he's a primatologist, but the antisocial angle never lands. If you cast Johnson in a movie, you need to tailor the character around him. Davis would have been more convincing as shy or reserved, but even that would have been a stretch given Johnson's natural charisma. Still, this is a minor quibble. Rampage knows it wants to be a giant smash-up action movie, and in that sense, it succeeds spectacularly. If you try not to overthink it, there's even a chance it might secretly be brilliant. Consider the film's science. DNA from a variety of creatures is combined into a single serum, delivered to one animal, which then inherits abilities from multiple species while growing enormous. A wolf, for example, might gain flying skills or porcine traits, and just keep getting bigger. It works as a metaphor for the movie itself. The original Rampage was a simple arcade game: pick a monster, smash a city, repeat. Infuse it with cinematic DNA, and it becomes a hybrid monster of action movie tropes, borrowing from King Kong, Pacific Rim, and more, while staying fun and chaotic. The spectacle is thrilling, yet deeply unsettling. Millions of digital lives are lost, entire city blocks flattened, and yet the movie wraps on a cheerful note. Watching the carnage is both predictable and slightly disturbing, a reminder that destruction in film can feel real even when it's obviously CGI. If there's a social message here, it's subtle. Cruel genetic experiments on animals will inevitably lead to chaos and human suffering. Beyond that, Rampage isn't trying to be a highbrow critique. It's loud, senseless, and explosively fun. And maybe, just maybe, it's smarter than it lets on. Rampage opens in theaters on April 12th. You've captured the essence of Rampage perfectly. It's a gloriously silly, over-the-top blockbuster that knows exactly what it is, and that self-awareness is what makes it work. The movie doesn't try to hide its ridiculousness, it leans into it. There's something inherently satisfying about a film that lets a giant albino gorilla, a flying wolf, and a massive crocodile rampage through a city while the human cast scrambles to contain them. Dwayne Johnson shines as Davis Okoye, the primatologist whose bond with George is the emotional anchor of the film. Their chemistry feels genuine, thanks to both Johnson's charisma and the incredible performance capture work that brings George to life. Naomie Harris as Dr. Kate Caldwell provides the necessary science-savvy counterpoint, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan's sarcastic government agent adds a layer of dry humor that keeps the action from becoming completely mindless. The villains, Melon Ackerman and Jake Lacey as the corporate siblings, are pure Saturday morning cartoon chaos. Their motivations are absurdly simple: create giant monsters, yet the film doesn't pretend it matters. It's exactly the kind of over-the-top evil that matches the film's tone. Even minor characters meet swift, merciless ends at the hands of rampaging beasts, which is oddly satisfying and underscores that Rampage doesn't waste time with sentimentality. At its core, Rampage succeeds because it embraces the spirit of its source material, a video game where the fun is smashing cities as a giant monster. The narrative is a scaffold to get to the spectacle, and the movie knows that. Johnson's effortless charisma, the playful absurdity of the villains, and the CGI mayhem combine into a surprisingly enjoyable ride. It's silly, it's loud, it's chaotic, and that's exactly the point. If you're in the mood for a big, dumb, unapologetically fun action movie where a gorilla punches helicopters and buildings crumble around you, Rampage delivers exactly that. It's not deep, it's not subtle, but it's unapologetically entertaining. Exactly, this part of Rampage highlights why the film works despite its absurdity. The siblings, CLA and Brett, are the quintessential over-the-top cartoon villains. Their goal is simply to create chaos with giant animals, and the movie never pretends their motivations are complex. That simplicity actually helps the film maintain its pace. It's all about spectacle and destruction, not convoluted plotting. Dwayne Johnson carries the film effortlessly as Davis Okoye, blending his natural charisma with genuine emotional beats in his scenes with George, the albino gorilla. Jeffrey Dean Morgan steals moments as the sarcastic, wisecracking government agent. His performance could feel exaggerated elsewhere, but it fits perfectly in Rampage's bombastic tone. The green screen heavy, CGI-laden action sequences are surprisingly well executed, letting the audience appreciate the scale and detail of the monsters without getting lost in visual chaos. Brad Peyton's direction leans into the fun, ensuring the movie knows it's ridiculous while still delivering thrilling spectacle. The performance capture work for George is top-notch, making the gorilla feel like a real character, not just a CGI prop. Even the smaller, recognizable cast members contribute to the energy, even if their roles are fleeting. Ultimately, Rampage is best approached with an open mind. It's silly, it's loud, and it's chaotic, but it's unapologetically entertaining. Between Johnson's presence, the inventive monster design, and the non-stop destruction, it's arguably one of the better video game adaptations to date. The film doesn't pretend to be anything other than a fun, blockbuster thrill ride, and it succeeds on that front. If you want, I can also summarize the entire movie plot and key takeaways into a concise version that hits all the major points without the repetitive tangents. It's a lot easier to digest that way. Do you want me to do that? The Rock does what he does best, but this time, he's up against giant monsters, somehow trapped in completely ridiculous bunkers, and somehow totally forgettable at the same time. Johnson charms, cracks wise, and basically plays his smart aleck self, which, let's be honest, is most of the movie. Rampage delivers a heated, wild ride. The frontman of the chaos knows exactly what kind of movie he's in. Jeffrey Dean Morgan slimes his way through the film as a shady government agent with a cowboy streak. He handles pistols like a pro, strapped low at the front of his pants, and casually wields them as if it's no big deal. While Rampage moves at a brisk pace, it's easy to gloss over the tiny logic gaps, though the audacity of it all can still hit you. But for a movie based on a plotless 80s arcade game, it somehow manages to weave an instantly convoluted plot that drags the whole thing down. The key mistake? Lingering just long enough for the audience to realize how absurd it all really is. In the original game, mutant ape, mutant wolf, and Godzilla-level monster wreak havoc on Chicago. In the movie, these are people who turn into monsters, a transformation barely touched on, just to get us to the action. The 4 credited screenwriters cobbled together a cocky narrative involving illegal biological weapons, a barely mentioned backstory about genetic engineering tech, mercenary threats that go nowhere, a fleeting anti-poaching subplot, and a whole host of other nonsense. You could forgive the ridiculous story setup and ludicrous premise. After all, this is a movie about monsters tearing through a major city. Yes, there's an obvious 9/11 call vibe that borders on poor taste. But when the movie halts all its pace, something that happens repeatedly in Rampage, there's nothing left to prop it up. Dwayne Johnson plays Davis, a pathologist who rescues an albino ape named George from a lab and raises him. They're buddies who prank the new recruits at the animal center where they work. Not kidding. Davis also happens to be an ex-Special Forces guy. Then we have a cartoonish brother and sister industrialist duo, whose reckless experiments in space, of course, come crashing down to Earth, kicking off the chaos. And there's Dr. Kate Caldwell, tragically sentient yet somehow tied to the disaster with her own reckless choices. And it goes on. And on. And on. Rampage truly falters when the script slows all momentum to a crawl, like a scene where everyone just stands in a lab, tossing around scientific jargon in a half-hearted attempt to sound smart. At one point, Dr. Caldwell even cites Wikipedia as evidence. Later, the villain lingers in a bedroom, recounting their evil plan in excruciating detail to a partner, as if exposition alone could carry the film. The brotherly duo tells us they've been conducting illegal genetic experiments in space, and yes, they could go to jail, but somehow, it's not much worse than the chaos they unleash. Rampage clocks in at only 107 minutes, but there's so much superfluous filler you could easily shave 25 minutes off and actually improve the film. For a movie that wastes so much time, there's almost nothing happening. Every plot point gets the most slapdash, convenient explanation. The monsters must attack Chicago, naturally, because the villain has a device that guides them there. Lazy? Sure, but not even the worst part. The villain's plan itself is truly, profoundly moronic. It actively undermines the one thing the movie has going for it: fast, spectacle-level action. And that action? It's at least visually possible. John Presant, fresh off work on San Andreas, clearly knows how to stage massive cityscapes. Again, the unfortunate 9/11 parallels aren't great, and the destruction is as audacious and as senseless as anything Zack Snyder did in Man of Steel, but with even less purpose. The film knows its buildings, streets, and collapses, but when it comes to monster-scale geography, the staging is inconsistent. Like so many films in this genre, the relative size of the creatures constantly shifts. A mutant alligator might charge as a hulking threat in one shot, only to shrink to the size of a few cars a scene later. At the end of the day, it's really The Rock who carries everything worthwhile about Rampage. Without his charisma, charm, and larger-than-life presence in every scene, the film would collapse into a total disaster, and not the fun kind. The script attempts to invest in the relationship between Davis and George, but it lands with little impact. It's fine, it does what it needs to do, but there's never much emotional payoff. Johnson shoulders it all effortlessly. He reacts, he charms, he shrugs off absurdities, like giant balls rolling through city streets or laser-blasting mutant walls, while everyone else basically exists to deliver exposition. He just teams up with his genetically enhanced ape buddy to survive the chaos. In that sense, you're glad it's him. Rampage, The Rock vs. Giant Monsters, is big, dumb fun. It doesn't quite match the action, comedy, and heart of Johnson's best work, but it delivers enough sheer, unapologetic spectacle to be enjoyable. The film manages to be both one of the more entertaining and one of the dumber video game adaptations in recent memory. Dwayne Johnson himself isn't new to video game movies. He started with the infamous 2005 Tomb Raider, a film even he admits fell victim to the legendary curse of video game adaptations. It wouldn't have taken much for Rampage to end up in the same boat, given it's based on a property that started as a midway arcade game in the 80s, a simple riff on B-movies about temperamental, city-destroying monsters. Dwayne Johnson starts Rampage as Davis Okoye, a devoted primatologist at the San Diego Wildlife Preserve who prefers the company of animals to people. After years of military service, Davis now leads an anti-poaching unit, spending his days training new recruits and caring for the gorillas, especially George, a rare albino silverback. Davis rescued George as an infant and taught him sign language, forging a deep bond. Everything changes one night when George is exposed to a mysterious chemical from a canister that crashes into the preserve. The chemical triggers rapid growth, turning George into a massive, destructive force. Desperate to save his friend before the government captures or kills him, Davis finds an unexpected ally in genetic engineer Dr. Kate Caldwell. She claims to understand what's happening to George and how to reverse his condition. But before they can intervene, George escapes, drawing the attention not only of the authorities but also of the shadowy forces behind a secret project known as Rampage. It soon becomes clear that the situation is far more complicated than Davis and Kate anticipated. George is not the only animal affected, others have been infected by this mysterious pathogen, escalating the stakes to citywide chaos. Unlike other video game adaptations such as Assassin's Creed or Warcraft, Rampage doesn't aspire to high cinematic art or to break the mold of the genre. Instead, it comfortably fits into an established action brand, and could almost have been an original blockbuster about The Rock battling giant monsters. References to the original game are largely incidental. The film doesn't achieve the perfect mix of action, comedy, and heart found in Johnson's best work, but it delivers solid, big-hearted fun. Rampage marks the third collaboration between Johnson and director Brad Peyton, following their family-friendly 3D adventure Journey to The Mysterious Island and the natural disaster thriller San Andreas. Peyton brings the experience he gained from those films to positive effect, resulting in one of his most polished efforts yet. The movie opens aboard a space station orbiting Earth, before cutting to the city-ravaging mayhem that dominates the third act. Visually, the film isn't as rich or saturated as San Andreas. It leans heavily on flat browns and grays, but the action sequences are cleanly shot and easy to follow. Peyton combines elements of monster horror, disaster tentpole spectacle, military action, and even, at one point, a cosmic thriller, giving Rampage a surprisingly varied cinematic identity. The story itself is cheerfully dim, leaning on big science fiction concepts like genetic engineering to explain the sudden appearance of massive, mutated beasts. Written by Ryan Engel, Carlton Cuse, Ryan J. Condal, and Adam Steichel, the script is loaded with exposition and clunky explanations for what's happening and why characters make certain decisions. Fortunately, the film never takes itself too seriously. Peyton and his crew favor forward momentum over depth, keeping the focus on spectacle rather than intricate plotting. In the end, Rampage is less concerned with complex characters or elaborate storytelling than it is with giant creatures smashing through cities, the game and the B-movies that inspired it, embracing its premise with unpretentious, thrilling chaos. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot to the characters. The relationship between Davis and George, brought to life through motion capture and green screen by performer Jason Liles, provides the film's serviceable emotional core. Rampage struggles at times to maintain the illusion that The Rock isn't interacting with a CGI creature, but it succeeds in making George a fun reflection of Davis's personality, rowdy, clever, but with a heart of gold. Meanwhile, Liles brings enough charisma and swagger to make Davis a worthy hero in his own right, even with a relatively simple character arc. Dr. Kate Caldwell mostly exists to witness Davis's antics and keep the plot moving forward. She's largely a supporting sidekick but remains relevant enough to the story. The rest of the human cast, however, is as ridiculous and cartoonish as the genetically mutated monsters they're chasing. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's government agent, Harvey Russell, struts around with a giant belt buckle and a pistol holstered at all times, lest anyone forget he's the cowboy type. Malin Ackerman and Jake Lacey play the over-the-top corporate siblings behind Project Rampage, while the remainder of the cast, familiar faces like Joe Manganiello, P.J. Byrne, and William Lee, mostly function as glorified extras. In the end, Rampage is exactly the tough, cheeky, and otherwise goofy video game movie its trailers promised, both for better and worse. It lacks the hard-hitting, memorable characters of Johnson's best films, like Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, but it offers enough popcorn-fueled spectacle to earn a passing grade. It may struggle to stand out during the summer movie season, especially next to films that appear better crafted or offer more substance alongside their action. That said, with a few weeks still left before Avengers: Infinity War arrives, Rampage delivers just enough to satisfy viewers in the mood for enjoyable, forgettable blockbuster fun. Playing nationwide in U.S. theaters, the film is 107 minutes long and rated PG-13 for sequences of intense action and destruction, along with brief language and crude gestures. Let us know what you think in the comments. Inspired by the classic arcade game of the same name, Rampage is utterly ridiculous, crampy, yet self-aware enough to be pure, dumb fun. It's exactly the kind of big, messy action movie fans were promised, with The Rock carrying the weight of the film on his charm. But even he can only do so much when the plot revolves around an insanely awful genetic editing formula accidentally unleashed, transforming 3 ordinary animals into giant mutant monsters that go on a citywide rampage. It's up to Davis to save both his animal friend and the city of Chicago, all while navigating a script that's stone-cold stupid at times, with on-the-nose and cringeworthy dialogue, especially regarding the science behind turning everyday animals into massive, destructive creatures. This thankless exposition falls mostly to Dr. Kate Caldwell, whose character delivers the necessary scientific explanations with all the weight of a stock supporting role. Hopefully, whoever entrusted her with this film understands that it's as much chaos and spectacle as it is human drama, big, dumb, and unapologetically so. If the joke about the Fast and Furious movies is that they were written by a 5-year-old, then Rampage feels like it was written by that same kid, now 10. He's developed a few more nouns, maybe, but it's still basically boom, smash, roar. Rampage is this generation's VIP sprint, though it's still not quite as charmingly cheesy as the old-school giant monster cult classics. Dwayne Johnson anchors the film with his signature mix of self-assured humor, charisma, and heart. His character is, quite frankly, overqualified, ex-special forces, anti-poaching operative, and devoted primatologist all in one. Interestingly, Johnson fought to change the original ending of Rampage. In the original script, George the gorilla dies, and Johnson felt strongly that audiences shouldn't leave the theater with that kind of sadness. In a recent Rolling Stone profile, he explained, "I don't like sad endings. Life brings enough of those, I don't want that in my movies. When the credits roll, I want people to feel great. They gave me all the reasons George should die. He sacrifices himself saving the world, defeating animals that mean harm to mankind. He dies like a brave soldier." Okay, but this is a movie. There's a crocodile the size of a football stadium. We're not making Saving Private Ryan. Johnson wouldn't reveal the new ending, but he reached a compromise with the studio that satisfied both sides. Over the years, he's built himself into a brand and knows what his fans want. For a dumb, monster smash blockbuster like Rampage, a happier ending was clearly the right choice. This film also marks Johnson's second video game adaptation, following Doom. Video game movies are notoriously tricky, often littered with misfires, but Rampage stands a better chance of capturing the spirit of its source material. The game was essentially plotless, all about giant monsters smashing through cities, and the movie stays true to that spirit. Stellar reviews may be unlikely, but the trailers promise fun, over-the-top blockbuster chaos. Originally, George's ending was much darker, but director Brad Peyton and Johnson, on their third collaboration, worked together to find a tone that balanced spectacle with heart. Rampage, a loose adaptation of the 1986 arcade game of the same name, delivers exactly what fans expect: giant creatures, massive city destruction, and The Rock doing what he does best. The film boasts big-budget special effects, and yes, the visuals are impressive, but it's Dwayne Johnson's charisma and charm that truly make Rampage worth watching. Even when enormous, city-flattening animals dominate the screen, the actor commands the audience's attention. At this stage in his career, Johnson knows his worth in Hollywood. He's not one to be pushed around by studios, but he also doesn't waste his star power. His fan base expects plenty of action and humor, and he takes seriously the responsibility to deliver. He wants audiences to leave the theater feeling good. Johnson grew up popping quarters into the Rampage arcade game, so starring in the film adaptation was a dream come true. The only problem? One major plot point in the original script didn't sit right with him: George dies. After spending the film building a bond between Davis Okoye and the albino gorilla, Johnson refused to end the story on a down note. The story follows Davis, who rescued George as a baby from poachers and raised him at the San Diego Wildlife Preserve. When the ape is transformed by an experimental pathogen into a massive monster, Davis sees him not as a threat, but as a friend. Throughout the film, he fights to protect George from government agencies while teaming up with him to confront the other mutated beasts, a wolf and a giant crocodile. In one sequence, the crocodile, larger than George, throws him into a ruined building, impaling him on a jagged steel beam. George struggles, but then turns the structure against the crocodile, stabbing it through the eye. Exhausted, he collapses, seemingly lifeless, but then sits up, signaling he was only playing. It's a callback to the dark sense of humor George displayed at the beginning of the film. In the original script, George would have stayed dead. Johnson, however, refused to accept that. In a recent Rolling Stone interview, he explained, "I don't like sad endings. Life brings enough of those, I don't want that in my movies. When the credits roll, I want people to feel great. We had a big meeting where they gave me all the reasons George should die. He sacrifices himself, saves the world, defeats these animals meant to harm mankind. He dies like a brave soldier." Okay, but this is a movie. There's a crocodile the size of a football stadium. We're not making Saving Private Ryan. The ending became such a point of connection for Johnson that he even threatened to walk away from the project if George didn't survive. Ultimately, a compromise was reached, keeping the heart of the story intact while giving audiences the uplifting conclusion Johnson wanted. Rampage opened at the top of the box office, reuniting Johnson with his San Andreas director Brad Peyton. Johnson plays the primatologist who raises George, only to see him and two other creatures, a wolf and a crocodile, mutate into giant monsters wreaking havoc across the U.S. It falls to Davis and George to save the day, and thanks to Johnson's insistence on a satisfying ending, the film balances over-the-top destruction with the heart that keeps viewers invested. The studio gave all the reasons George should die. He sacrifices himself, saves the world, defeats animals with ill intentions, dies like a brave soldier. Johnson's response? Okay, but this is a movie. There's a crocodile the size of a football stadium, we're not making Saving Private Ryan. He elaborates on why happy endings are so important, both for the film and for his relationship with audiences. I've built a trust with audiences around the world over the years. They come to my movies expecting to feel good. So sometimes, I have to play my card. If this doesn't work, I'm not doing the movie. We have to figure it out. This offers fascinating insight into the Dwayne Johnson brand, a topic recently discussed on the KER.com podcast. In an era dominated by franchises and IP-driven films, Johnson has almost become an IP unto himself. People come to his movies to see Dwayne Johnson, and the results speak for themselves. Beyond solid entries like Central Intelligence, he has massive worldwide phenomena like Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. Rampage itself rocked the international box office, earning $114 million across 61 territories. While it didn't top the domestic charts, where it pulled in $34 million, overseas audiences embraced it. Combined with domestic earnings, the Warner Bros. And New Line video game adaptation has grossed $148 million globally. The film had its strongest openings in China, pulling in $55 million from 21,500 screens. In the UK and South Korea, it earned $5.7 million each from 97 and 895 screens respectively. Other international markets include Mexico with $4.8 million from 2,835 screens, Malaysia with $3.5 million from 590 screens, Indonesia with $3.1 million from 687 screens, and Russia with $3.1 million from 2,668 screens. Upcoming releases will prioritize France, Germany, and Japan. For comparison, Paramount's A Wrinkle in Time opened second internationally with $22 million across 56 territories, along with a $32.9 million domestic weekend, bringing its global total to $155 million. Meanwhile, Ready Player One continues to perform strongly overseas, generating $33.8 million in 65 markets for a cumulative total of $36.2 million and a worldwide gross of $474.8 million. The film has performed especially well in China, earning $13.9 million from 8,000 screens this weekend alone, bringing its total in the country to $193 million. In France, Ready Player One earned $2.4 million on 667 screens, while in South Korea, it brought in $1.9 million on 585 screens. The film will launch in another key market, Japan, on April 20th. Other recent international releases include Pacific Rim: Uprising, which took in $6.1 million across 66 territories, and the sequel starring John Boyega, which opened in Japan with $3.3 million from 320 locations, bringing its worldwide total to $180 million. Blockers earned $3.9 million across 21 territories during its sophomore weekend, while the R-rated comedy The Ranch accumulated $10.3 million in North America for a worldwide total of $52.9 million. John Cena's Playing with Fire opened in 6 markets this weekend, earning $1.2 million from 495 locations, alongside Austria, where it took in $308,000 from 71 locations. Meanwhile, Universal's latest Blumhouse collaboration, Truth or Dare, earned $2.6 million in 7 international territories, combining with $19.1 million in North America for a worldwide total of $21.7 million on a budget under $5 million. Its biggest international openings were in the UK and Ireland, where it made $1.3 million. Rampage's international success proves that Dwayne Johnson can sell nearly any movie. It was a competitive weekend at the box office, yet Rampage roared to the top, demonstrating once again the undeniable power of The Rock. Against expectations, a 2018 adaptation of a video game featuring a giant gorilla as the central character managed to succeed, grossing over $34.5 million domestically despite mixed reviews. Worldwide, Rampage has already amassed over $148 million on a $120 million budget. For a film released just 2 weeks before Avengers: Infinity War, those are remarkable numbers. This is also part of a growing trend with Johnson's career. Last year, Jumanji: Welcome to the Jungle became the 5th highest-grossing film of 2017, earning over $953 million globally, surpassing even Spider-Man: Homecoming. Once again, Johnson proves that when he's involved, audiences show up, domestically, internationally, and in droves. Dwayne Johnson stars in Rampage as Davis Okoye, a devoted primatologist at the San Diego Wildlife Preserve. After years of military service, Davis now leads an anti-poaching unit, training new recruits and caring for the preserve's gorillas, especially George, a rare albino silverback whom Davis rescued as an infant and taught sign language. Their bond is at the heart of the film, providing the emotional core amid the chaos. Everything changes when a mysterious chemical from a crashed canister infects George, causing him to grow uncontrollably. Desperate to save his friend before the government captures or kills him, Davis finds an unexpected ally in genetic engineer Dr. Kate Caldwell. But George escapes, drawing the attention of the authorities and the shadowy forces behind Project Rampage. Soon, Davis discovers that George is not the only animal affected. Others, including a wolf and a giant crocodile, have mutated into monstrous, city-smashing beasts. Unlike other video game adaptations like Assassin's Creed or Warcraft, Rampage doesn't try to reinvent the genre. It comfortably exists as a blockbuster spectacle, and could almost work as an original film about The Rock battling giant monsters. The story leans heavily on science fiction concepts like genetic engineering, and the script is packed with exposition explaining why these animals are suddenly enormous and dangerous. But the filmmakers avoid taking themselves too seriously, favoring forward momentum, action, and humor over deep plotting. Brad Peyton, returning to direct his third collaboration with Johnson after Journey to The Mysterious Island in San Andreas, brings his experience to the film. Visually, the movie is dominated by flat browns and grays rather than lush color, but the action sequences are clean, clear, and easy to follow. Peyton blends monster horror, disaster spectacle, military action, and even hints of cosmic thriller to keep the movie dynamic. Johnson's performance carries the film. He infuses Davis with humor, heart, and swagger, making him a compelling hero even amidst cartoonish human characters and CGI monsters. Jason Liles brings George to life through motion capture, giving the gorilla personality, humor, and emotional resonance. Dr. Caldwell serves as a competent sidekick, while the rest of the cast, including Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the over-the-top government agent Harvey Russell and the corporate villain siblings, largely functions as comic or narrative support. One major point of discussion during production was the ending. In the original script, George dies, a choice Johnson rejected. He explained in Rolling Stone, "I don't like sad endings. Life brings enough of those, I don't want that in my movies. When the credits roll, I want people to feel great. There's a crocodile the size of a football stadium, we're not making Saving Private Ryan." Johnson even threatened to walk away from the project unless the ending was changed. Ultimately, a compromise was reached, giving audiences an uplifting conclusion while keeping the stakes high. This insistence reflects Johnson's careful cultivation of his brand. Fans expect big action, humor, and heart from his movies, and he delivers. Rampage's story is simple: giant mutated animals wreak havoc across the city, and it's up to Davis and George to save the day. There's plenty of boom, smash, and spectacle, and while the dialogue can be clunky and the science laughable, the film never pretends to be anything other than a fun, over-the-top blockbuster. Johnson's charm keeps the movie engaging, and George adds a surprising emotional depth, even in the midst of destruction. The film also performs impressively at the box office. Domestically, it grossed $34.5 million on opening weekend, despite mixed reviews. Internationally, it's been even more successful, earning $114 million across 61 territories, including China, $13.9 million this weekend alone, $193 million total, the UK, South Korea, Mexico, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Russia. Combined with domestic earnings, Rampage has grossed $148 million globally against a $120 million budget. Its strong performance demonstrates Johnson's star power. Audiences come to see Dwayne Johnson, and the results are undeniable. Overall, Rampage is a goofy, cheeky, and unapologetically fun monster movie. It doesn't have the complex characters or narrative depth of Johnson's best films, but it delivers big-hearted chaos, thrilling action, and enough humor to satisfy audiences looking for pure popcorn entertainment. For fans of The Rock, giant monsters, or over-the-top city destruction, Rampage hits all the right notes. Rampage is a high-octane, city-flattening spectacle built around Dwayne Johnson's charm and charisma. Johnson stars as Davis Okoye, a primatologist with a deep connection to the animals in his care. Among them is George, a rare albino silverback gorilla whom Davis rescued as a baby from poachers. Their bond forms the emotional backbone of the film, a heartfelt contrast to the chaos that unfolds when George is exposed to an experimental pathogen. The chemical transforms him into a towering, rampaging creature, and soon two other animals, a wolf and a massive crocodile, mutate as well. Davis's mission is simple yet urgent: protect his friend, stop the monsters from destroying the city, and navigate the obstacles of both overzealous government agents and corporate greed. Dr. Kate Caldwell, a geneticist with expertise in the pathogen, becomes his ally, helping to explain the science, however implausible, that underpins the mutations. The film blends elements of disaster cinema, monster horror, military action, and even touches of sci-fi thriller, keeping audiences constantly on the move. Johnson's performance carries the movie. As Davis, he's a perfect mix of humor, gravitas, and action hero charisma. He balances the film's chaos with emotional grounding, giving the audience someone to care about amid skyscraper-smashing monsters. Motion capture performer Jason Liles brings George to life, giving the gorilla a distinct personality, humor, and subtle emotional depth. This relationship between man and beast elevates what could have been a purely spectacle-driven film. The human supporting cast leans into exaggeration and cartoonish energy. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's government agent Harvey Russell is the epitome of cowboy bravado, always brandishing a giant belt buckle and a pistol, while the corporate villain siblings are overtly theatrical in their greed and ambition. These over-the-top performances help the movie embrace its self-aware, ridiculous tone. One of the film's most notable production stories involves the ending. In the original script, George dies, a decision Johnson immediately opposed. He argued that after building a strong emotional connection between Davis and George, the audience deserved a hopeful conclusion. He told Rolling Stone, "I don't like sad endings. Life brings enough of those, I don't want that in my movies. When the credits roll, I want people to feel great. There's a crocodile the size of a football stadium, we're not making Saving Private Ryan." Johnson's insistence ultimately led to a compromise that gave the film a more uplifting ending, proving how much the actor's brand and connection with audiences influenced the creative process. Director Brad Peyton, collaborating with Johnson for the third time after San Andreas and Journey to The Mysterious Island, brings his experience to the action sequences, balancing visual clarity with spectacle. While the color palette is muted, dominated by browns and grays, the action is cleanly shot and easy to follow. Giant creatures smashing through buildings, streets, and bridges form the centerpiece of the film's excitement. Peyton blends classic monster movie tropes with modern CGI and blockbuster pacing, delivering scenes that are thrilling, chaotic, and often humorous. Rampage leans heavily into its roots as a 1980s arcade game adaptation. The story is intentionally simple: mutants versus city, chaos versus heroism. While it lacks complex plotting, it doesn't pretend to be anything more than a fun, explosive adventure. Explosions, skyscraper collapses, and epic monster battles dominate the screen, while Johnson's performance and the emotional stakes with George provide the heart that makes the spectacle matter. Box office results reinforce Johnson's draw. Domestically, Rampage opened with $34.5 million despite mixed reviews. Internationally, it grossed $114 million across 61 territories, with particularly strong performances in China, $13.9 million over the weekend, $193 million total, the UK, South Korea, Mexico, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Russia. Globally, the film has amassed $148 million on a $120 million budget, a remarkable achievement for a pre-Avengers, Infinity War release. Rampage demonstrates the enduring appeal of Johnson as a brand. Audiences come to his movies expecting humor, heart, and action, and he delivers in spades. From Central Intelligence to Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, which grossed $953 million worldwide, Johnson's films consistently combine spectacle with an approachable, likable hero at their center. Rampage, with its mix of giant monsters, chaotic action, and heartfelt relationships, fits neatly into this pattern. Ultimately, Rampage is a celebration of blockbuster fun. It's loud, it's ridiculous, and it knows it. Giant animals smash buildings, cars fly, chaos reigns, but at its center is a story about loyalty, friendship, and heroism. Johnson and Lyles give audiences characters they care about, and the movie's willingness to embrace absurdity without losing emotional grounding makes it memorable. For fans of The Rock, over-the-top action, or just big, dumb, fun monster movies, Rampage delivers exactly what it promises: chaos, heart, and sheer cinematic spectacle.